You are listening to the Small Town Big Talk Show, the weekly podcast for small town people with big dreams and ideas. I'm your host, Rebecca Undum, and each week we'll cover a topic meant to inspire, encourage, and empower you to live big in your small town. Although it has its challenges, nothing beats small town living, and we're committed to sharing the best of what's working in the communities we serve. So enjoy this episode, and we hope it helps you to bloom where you've been planted. Hello, friends. Today's guest is Kraig Steinhoff. He is the superintendent of Oaks Public Schools, and he and his staff and faculty, it's definitely a team effort. They've been doing some really innovative and interesting things in the world of education at our school. And so we sat down today to tackle that, to talk about what does it mean to take on the mindset of the continuous learner. Not only in his own role, but that's what he encourages in his staff, and certainly is something he's also hoping through this curriculum change that we discuss a bit to incorporate or to develop in our students. So if you are a parent and you have a child in the school system in your small town, you definitely want to catch this awesome discussion about the future of education for our students, how different it looks now as to how it did when we were young, and what, as a parent, we can each do to better engage with our local school system. So enjoy this chat with my friend, Mr. Kraig Steinhoff. All right, Mr. Steinhoff.
Good morning.
I'm so happy that you're sitting here with me. So I've been doing this show for, 3/4 of a year now, and now we're just straight into audio, which is awesome for all of our road warriors that listen in from small towns all over the place.
Well, they don't have to see me. That's
they don't have to see me either. So I like half got ready today, but now I'm just like, I can show up in sweatpants if I want, which I like. Mm-hmm. Kind of dig it. So, well, you look great today with your shirt and tie. You look good every day.
My wife is fully engaged in that process. Yeah.
Good for you.
Sure.
Know your limits.
Pants, tie around the two hangers, so I know what it is.
Know your limits. Yeah, that's good. So I'm super excited to talk to you. We had a great conversation before we even hit record here too, but you're probably going to have to come back because there's just a lot of stuff that we can talk about. And so I'm going to kind of preface our conversation here with kind of what I said to you before, that as a person growing up in this community, and I would even say when we'd first moved back, or I'd first come back here, the school always felt like this separate thing, kind of. You know, like you have this one job to do and it's to educate students. And I didn't always understand how important the vitality and prosperity of our school is to everything else that happens in the community, and vice versa, right? So now being part of the chamber, being part of economic development, being part of our community foundation, our school and what the business community does for the school, there's just this really important collaboration that needs to take place. And so in thinking about the fact that all I talk about on this show is like small town stuff, what's working, what's not working, our school district, we kind of have it going on. I mean, I can say that, you don't have to say that, but we do. We've got a lot of things going for us right now, and yet it hasn't come with its fair share of challenges. So I am excited to talk to you today. I think there's kind of an overall approach to learning that you want to share with what we're doing in our school. And as we go to, hopefully we can talk a little bit about how you've managed as the superintendent of our school, along with your staff, because obviously it's a huge collective team effort, to keep being innovative in a small town where change maybe isn't so easily embraced all the time, right? Maybe, sort of. So let's just start there. So tell us a little bit about what's going on at Oaks Public Schools right now.
Yeah, before we get into that, I'd like to follow up with your comment about the school and the community. You know, I also had a revelation a couple of years ago when I did my thesis on recruitment and retention study on why we were having such a turnover issue with the school. And one of the things that became very clear is that if the community is not one that people want to move into, right, no matter what I do as a district, no matter what we have, flashy lights and bells and whistles going off, people have to be willing and wanting to live in the community in which they're going to work in. And so without that community support, I'm at a loss for being able to bring employees in here. And that's huge. And so it's a two-way street.
Totally.
Both directions. We can't have one without the other.
Right. And I do think, again, that is just something that can get lost in. And so the word that I'd used with you in our email exchange was the word silos, right? it's really easy to get completely focused inwardly on what's going on within the four walls of whatever organization you're a part of. So the hospital or, the convenience store on Main Street. I mean, any of the businesses that exist and the school, it can be really easy just to say, well, what do we need to do? And the we needs to always be we inside the four walls plus everybody on the outside of those four walls, especially in a small town. There's no other way around it. So I think if nothing else, I hope that this kind of sparks that reminder for everybody that we are really all in this together. And the quality of life stuff that a chamber does or your civic groups do really do bear an important impact on, like you just said, your ability to find and keep good teachers and other staff.
And I think we can all agree that we're in it together, that we want the same things for our children.
Yeah.
We want them to have successful futures.
Right.
And for the most part, probably we all want them to have maybe a better life than we had as adults or are having. And I think that it's A-okay that we show and experience that they can have that great quality of life in small towns.
Yeah. Amen. Totally agree.
Back to your other question, though, of what's going on.
Yeah. What's going on?
I appreciate your compliment on we've got it going on. I would tend to agree with it, but I'm biased because of the position I'm in.
Yeah.
But, we're fortunate that we're not going through the process of being innovative alone as a district. We started, this is year 3, I believe, of a second order change at the junior high and high school level. We switched to flex mod scheduling, and that was a big, huge adjustment that happened. But then the year after that, there was an initiative that came out, and we were asked as schools across North Dakota on whether or not we wanted to consider moving to personalized competency-based learning. And it ended up being that there are 5 schools in the state that are partnering with the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction, an organization called KnowledgeWorks, who are currently assisting 64 schools across the United States of America in this transition work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Kraig, I had no idea that it was that. I mean, okay, so I've seen, you guys been kind of dripping out communications about it, right? Trying to educate us as we go. So I'm a parent, 2 kids in the school district at the moment. And it's you see it coming and stuff, but to hear that we're one of 64 schools across the nation, that's huge. I mean, that's truly huge.
It is huge. And we're part of a bigger group that's going along this transition. And it sounds like it's new and we're one of the, forefronts, but we're not. A lot of this started actually, and I did my dissertation on this. So that's how I got a lot of background into competency-based education. But Chugach, Alaska is one of the first schools that started this back in 1994. And they did it before technology. And they ultimately did it because they were failing their students. Their students were not graduating. Their students were not going on and having successful careers, whether it was in work or at post-secondary. And so it started there and then is, I guess, infiltrated across the nation and then really become more evident as of the last several years. The Every Student Succeeds Act that the Department of Education put out talked about the need for a transition in education, and even the Carnegie Foundation, the Carnegie unit, were all based on seat time. Everything is based on how long kids are in a seat is how we're going to gauge what they've learned. The Carnegie Foundation came out and said, we're not sure this is the way it should be anymore. And we think that competency-based education should be consideration and can be a replacement, so to speak, of the traditional educational system we've had that's based on seat time.
Yeah. Okay. So can you give the listeners a high level overview of kind of what the traditional education system looked like and what this personalized learning or competency-based learning looks like instead?
Sure.
Like what's the swaps?
Yeah.
If you can.
So starting with traditional based education, if you go back in time, obviously the forefathers that designed this were Henry Ford and Dale Carnegie and many of those leaders, and their intent was to prepare students to be able to be ready for the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
So we want them to be able to do the same things together over and over again with minimal mistakes.
Yep.
So we had bells, we had rows, and we taught kids along the same time frame and kept having them do everything together. Well, obviously the Industrial Revolution, the first one's over. We've had multiple other ones since then.
Mm-hmm.
But education really hasn't changed a lot with that process.
Right.
And so now with schools transitioning across the nation to this, instead of it being based on seat time, we're saying kids should really move on after they understand the content and are able to show that they're competent in it, versus just saying, well, you spent the time. Do you know it or don't know it? So be it. And the kids that know it are getting A's, and the kids that don't know it are getting D's, and we're moving on regardless.
Right.
And so the shift is kind of similar in many ways to what I probably had happen, or what happened to our forefathers, that in one-room schoolhouses, they didn't have every kid moving at the same time, the same pace. They had different ages of kids, different levels of kids, and the kids moved on based on when they were competent. So there's similarities there,
which is super interesting.
Yeah,
my dad went to school in a one-room schoolhouse. He has stories about that, and it is very hard to imagine.
Right,
having come from, it's very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. And so that's a way to think about it in terms of having kids learning content at different levels at different times. But there's also other sides of it. For example, we want to incorporate agency into the kids' learning. And so learner agency is a very difficult thing to experience and really explain and understand. But what we're focusing on agency is having the kids set their own advantageous goals, having the kids monitor their goals, having the students be able to evaluate at the end, did they meet the goals, and then have more self-efficacy and be able to have a growth mindset from the process. So, but we're dabbling in it slowly. Like, for example, you'd say, what's happening this year in Oaks with learner agency? And if you'd walk around the hallways, you'd see now, or classrooms, you see that we have things such as codes of cooperation and standard operating procedures. Well, my opinion, a simplistic view is standard operating procedures are like rules that you and I had in school. But the teachers came up with and said, you will do this, this, and this. Well, instead, we're flipping it and saying, okay, students, how are we going to operate? What are going to be our standard, our SOP, our standard operating procedure, so that we can collaborate, create, and learn, effectively, and we're allowing the students to come up with
They co-create those. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And they put them on paper, sign their initials, their names to it, and they were part of the process of designing what, quote unquote, the rules are now. Code of cooperation, we did it with the staff this fall as an example on our commitments of what does it look like for us as staff to show respect in the community, to show respect in school, to show respect in the classroom. We did it for genuine relationships. We did it for growth mindset.
And those are the 3 core values of the Oaks Public School
System. There's the 3 core commitments of ours. But instead of me saying to the staff, you must do this to show respect, you must do this, we allowed them to come up with and say, this is how we need to make sure that we're doing this and showing these. And now they've got a code that they're following that they come up with. And so the staff had staff agency. And my expectation is now they take it down and do that with students. Agency will continue on, though, too. We want students to be able to have choice in their learning. So instead of, here's the assessment, everyone's going to take the same quiz, children should be able to have access to showing they're competent in more ways than just one specific way. So that's another small thing. We're not there yet, but that's the direction we're moving to, in regards to learner agency as it relates to personalized competency-based learning.
Okay. So many things that I'm thinking right now. So one of the things I think is most fascinating about this is, given my professional background in people development, right? This is something people have always needed, is agency, right? Mm-hmm. So you and I have talked about several years ago when you showed the documentary Most Likely to Succeed, right? Was what it was called.
Smith, yes.
And we talked about the fact that I would be and this is air quotes for people that can't see us, I'm a successful byproduct of a traditional education system, right? Like, I got really good grades.
Me too. Ditto.
But so what? Like, at the end of it, you have to go, okay, but so what? Did that equip me in some way to do a specific thing? what it equipped me to do, Kraig, is to accept a set of tasks, predetermined tasks with an order and very specific instructions, and follow them. And I want to hear your specific feelings about this. But one of the things I heard a lot when we were going through the FlexMod scheduling transition, which was very, very hard and challenging for people, parents to kind of get, maybe students caught onto it faster because they're a little more adaptable than we are as adults. But if it was good enough for me, like if the way that I was brought up through the school system, if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for my kids. I heard that a few times, and I didn't ever just address it because I don't know that I was the person to. But you and I are sitting here, and this is my podcast, so I get to say it now. Right. Here's where I think that there's fallacy in that line of thinking, and I'm curious to hear if you agree. The world that these kids are being prepared for is a vastly different world than we were being prepared for. And even now, I can tell you that this opportunity that exists to create your own way, to build your own business, that's one thing. Then let alone the fact that, with artificial intelligence, a lot of the rote things that can be done by AI are going to be done by AI. And so what are we left with? We're left with the jobs that require people to have agency. They have to be able to think for themselves. They need to be able to foster creativity and collaboration and all of these things. And so I see this as a really important move to help these kids, because we have no idea what jobs they're even preparing themselves for. Those jobs don't exist. So what do you think of that? And did you ever feel that way? Did you hear that? Have you heard that comment from parents?
Yeah, absolutely. That comment comes up not only here, but in other communities of, it was good enough for me. Right. It needs to be, why isn't it going to be good enough for my students or my children? But you hit the nail on the head, and you hit the same answer I give, just with a little bit different verbiage. And my response is, we have to prepare our kids for their futures, not prepare them for what we remember our futures to be when we were students.
It's totally different ballgame.
Yes, the futures are different. And so even if we think that we can prepare them for what our futures were, they might be successful if they were adults like we are right now, but that's not going to be the world that they live in at that time. And so we have to be doing a better job of preparing them for what their future has in store. And I think everyone can agree that we want them to be prepared for their future. Right. And we have to be basing some of this information and data on what is coming out from research. And, we have futurists that are predicting the same thing. You talk about anything that's repetitive, artificial intelligence is going to take that over. So
right.
that leads me into the importance of collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, communication.
All of it.
Which is part of our Portrait of a Grad, which is also part of our shift of personalized competency-based learning, that we have to be evaluating our students and making sure that they're not only learning content, but they're learning the 21st century skills, which are the 4 C's we just talked about.
Right. So the other question I want to ask is, where do the trade jobs fit into this picture? Because I do think that that's something, again, it's interesting. You've got, on one hand, everything we just talked about. And then on the other hand, you have the trend towards everybody going and pursuing a 4-year degree, sometimes to their detriment because the jobs don't exist, right? I think both of those things are happening at the same time, right? A lot of the kind of shortage that we have in the trades right now, likely a lot of those jobs are going to be replaced by AI. I really think, and then what's the time frame? I don't know. I am not a futurist. You can just kind of see the trends happening. But where do you think 21st century learning skills and this shift towards personalized learning, how does that still serve even students that may go on to pursue, and maybe they don't get any further education, right? They choose to go straight into the workforce. How does that impact them or the trades?
And I think about that oftentimes in terms of, if a student goes into something that they really are passionate about and do that, and then find out that their trade has been replaced with artificial intelligence down the road. My thought process and my hope is, if we have trained them to be creative and train them to have critical thinking and train them to collaborate, that they're still able to be within that same realm of what they're passionate about. Right. But their specific job tasks may change. And I don't know what that would be, but maybe instead of them doing that task, part of the function of the school of having a two-way radio.
That's right.
But instead of doing that specific task, maybe they're going to be the ones that will be working with creating the code or programming artificial intelligence to do that, or working with the public when the artificial intelligent robot is not doing like they're supposed to be doing. I mean, and all those things. And so I guess I would go back to, we want our students to be able to be adaptable and to be nimble and be able to adjust on the fly for the changing future.
Yeah. And, one of the things that, and I said my professional background, for me, this puts an emphasis on interpersonal skill development. Mm-hmm. And that's a really big deal. And that is something that all this beautiful technology is weakening in our current generation. And this isn't just me, like, I don't think this is just me being like an old cranky lady saying like nobody can, but they're just, this kind of focus on education will force them to look up from a screen or from their phone or from whatever, because you can't collaborate without interpersonal skills. You can't communicate without it. Right. You can creatively think, but then you can't, if you can't communicate what you're thinking, so they all really tie back to having strong sense of how to be human. And being human is the one thing that AI can't do.
Amen.
Right. And I'm so passionate about that because I just get frustrated. Like, yeah, absolutely. 20 years down the road, our workforce is going to look really different than it does right now. And that might be okay. And you know what? It doesn't matter if it's okay or if it's not okay. We need to figure out, and especially you in this position as an educator and the person, right now running our school, preparing our kids for whatever that is, to be able to accept it and lean into it and not resist it. And I think this is a good conversation for kind of the entire, just outside of Oaks Public School, but it's like our whole community. How do we lean into the realities of the way that the world is working and work with it instead of pushing or fighting against it? Because it just it's fruitless.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the lean into revolves around the pace at which we're leaning into it. Because I think we have to be careful too and celebrate the success that we have had and are having with the style in which we're educating, and not just say we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and totally start anew and start something from scratch when we're having success already. And so that ties back to my belief of continuous improvement, because I get asked the question of what's this going to look like when you're done? And I'll ask the question back, what do you mean done?
Yeah.
We're never going to be done. We're going to always be evolving and growing and have that attitude that it's never going to be a certain spot and say, oh, we've got there now, we're not going to change again.
Right.
But to have the mindset of we're always going to be changing, we're always going to be doing something new to some extent. Yes.
You're always going to be moving. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one of my tenets of just like for small communities in general is that if we're not growing, we're dying. So that's the choice. If we stand still, we're actually going to stagnate.
Right.
And so, and that's, you have to get on a treadmill and just run your face off for hours. It's not like forever you're going to run at that pace. Mm-hmm. There's going to be times you're maybe moving a little quicker, but we're always going to be in motion. And
we have to be.
That can feel a little tiring. I mean, I can respect that. And yet at the same time, I mean, fundamentally as people, we were not meant to be completely still. We are meant to evolve. We are meant to grow. We are meant to iterate too. Mm-hmm. And that's with all these things that you're looking at doing. Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I can get where people are just like, oh, can it just hold for a period of time?
Right. We have some of that happening of can it just hold, but we also have the other spectrum of people whose children are in high school and close to graduating, and they'll say, Kraig, can't you move faster so that our kids can experience this new, the personalized learning piece? And that's a challenge for us too, is how do we balance the pace in which we're moving so we're not letting those that are in the upper high school not be able to experience some of the things we're doing. But that's a challenge of ours too, of meeting both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah. So back to this concept of continuous improvement, another thing that you're touching on, I think is really valuable, again, outside of the school, but small towns in general, is recognizing that if we say, well, we're going to change it, whatever it is, right? And we say, like you said, throw the baby out with bathwater. What we end up doing is angering everybody that ever had a part of what was. Mm-hmm. And that isn't the approach to take, because I don't believe it has to be either progress or the old way. Like I just feel like it's a blend of both, right? What do you think about that? Being that this has been the school system's been around for a very long time. There's a lot of people in this community that taught here forever and then now are retired.
I think you are exactly on point. My belief is that we're not really changing everything we're doing. We're taking the bits and pieces of excellence of education throughout the centuries and putting that together and saying, we're going to take what really worked as a whole and put it together. And then when I have those conversations, people's faces light up and say, oh, well, Mr. Ringdahl did that with me years ago. They'll start to think back to the teacher that did things a little bit different way back when, and the light bulb goes off sort of in their mind. And we have to utilize what's worked in the past, maybe mold and modify it, but it's not just a total change of everything new and sort of thing else out.
Right. And I think sometimes people confuse intentions and the core commitments with the methods or the processes. Those are going to change because we are, like we've said now, and hopefully we've beat it enough, like the world of our kids. Like think about my oldest son is in 5th grade. The world you're preparing him for, I don't know what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And that's because things evolve and change a lot faster too. You know, when I was in school 20 years ago and I was graduating, you knew with some certainty. I mean, it wasn't this big, complete unknown for, a 5th grader at that time. It's like you knew what they were going to be coming into. And technology changes everything. And I get that sometimes it's not always for the better, but I think if we can keep a good mindset or if we can keep a good attitude about what it can mean, and I think that we can overcome some of those things that become challenging about it.
I think we need to view technology as a tool. Mm-hmm. It's not the be-all, end-all. And we definitely are clear on the fact that us switching to personalized learning does not mean that we are moving to online learning where a child simply sits in front of a screen and gets everything from that.
Right.
My belief is that our number one tool that we have here is the staff.
Right.
Technology is another tool, but the staff that we have here that are educating the kids is the number one tool that we have in our arsenal to prepare our students for the future.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Okay, so one last question for you is thinking about the moms or dads that maybe are listening to this that aren't necessarily affiliated with the school, except they have a student here. What would you encourage them to do if they want to know how things are happening at their school? They want to be involved in their school. What does good parent advocacy or child advocacy on the part of a parent, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. In addition to all the things we've talked about thus far, one of our other major goals this year is to improve family engagement. And so my advice for parents is to reach out to your student, your kid's teacher, talk to them. If you've got questions, there's things you want to know, ask them. They welcome your requests and your information and find out what it is that they can do as a parent to help be engaged and be part of that process. And as we're learning along this journey, and you're going to be part of our book study, Dr. Constantino, his research all is based on engagement that leads to achievement with students. And so we're going to focus our attention on how do we engage families to be able to lead to better student achievement. And a little snippet, he talks about if you look back 30, 40 years ago, this typical family structure was mom being at home, dad working, several kids, come home at night, eat supper together, talk about how's school go. Mm-hmm. And so the families were engaged that way. Well, that nuclear family, quote unquote, is 17% of families across the United States as of today. So that's not happening. That's not the way.
It doesn't look like that.
It doesn't look like that now.
Right.
And so the kids are not able to have that same level of engagement. And we need to engage families differently than we've done in the past. And so I think the best thing that we're going to need to do, and what research shows, is that the way to do that is engage them about future, not engage them about what's already happened in the past. And by doing that, the 30,000-foot view is that we're simply getting families and school to be putting the same sort of pressure, and I don't want to say stress, but pressure on students of here's what's coming up, here's what we're expecting of you, and we both understand what that is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about this because I do think there again, like you want to talk even just like the silos between home and school, that exists.
Yes.
And it feels, sometimes I think it can feel, and not necessarily with our school specifically, but I think as parents, you can sometimes feel like they don't want my input, or I shouldn't ask or I shouldn't engage because then it looks like I'm not supporting them. And maybe vice versa, if you've got an over involved, and there's air quotes around that, because what does an over involved parent really look like? And, so just, I think I'm excited for what that's going to mean for our school, because I think it's really important. It's more than just, engagement is not just like helping your kid with their homework.
Right.
It's a lot more than that.
Right. Engagement, it is. It's a lot more than that. It's about having, a passion towards what is happening at the school, a passion towards what's happening in your students' life. And I think another part of it is just being present. And I struggle with that because of how busy we are. I struggle with it at work. I struggle with it at home. I already had a discussion before you came in with another employee of the school that said, it's so busy right now, I'm not shutting the cupboard doors at home. And my husband said, this is how I can tell you're totally tapped out.
Right.
You're forgetting to shut the closet doors or the cabinet doors in the kitchen. And I always know that happens. And I think we have to help families and help our staff be present in the moment in which we're working with the kids, and not let all the other stuff just be spinning and spinning and spinning. And we never are able to stick to what needs to be happening at that current time.
Right. I think prioritizing life is really, really important, because there is, in a small town, I think sometimes we're even a little more susceptible to the polls, because there's just so many things that we could contribute our time and our efforts and our presence, our mindfulness to. And yet at the end of the day, I mean, I call myself back to this a lot because I've got my hands in a lot of things. And sometimes I'm just like, okay, so I may be serving all those other things, but who's getting the short end of the stick? It's often my kids. It's often me, right? I don't show up for them like I want to. So I think that's just a good encouragement to everybody to just think like, is there something you could pare back in your life so that you could have a bit more of a focus on?
And I personally believe that's why, as a nation, families have struggled to be engaged at the level they once were. They don't have the time to be able to do it because they're so busy with everything going on,
right?
Both work and home.
Right. Yeah, and there again, that's a different world. Like you'd said, in most households, both parents work. So there's just not that core time. So everybody should try, though, their hardest to find 5 minutes a day where all you're doing is looking at your child face to face with eyeballs to eyeballs, and really having a meaningful conversation. 5 minutes is not a lot. I'd hope it could be more. But I swear there are days that you get to the end of the day and you just think, oh my goodness, like I feel like I didn't even speak to you, child or spouse. So.
And we're all involved in that. And yet I think we would also be able to agree that if we think about 30 years from now, what's going to be more important? The 5 minutes that we spent with our kids? Or the 5 minutes we spent running, chasing something else?
Whatever else.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's their future that we're preparing them for.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's the most important thing that we're doing.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. It'll be good. Well, thank you for your time today, Mr. Steinhoff.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you going to come back?
Well, we'll see how the reviews go on this first.
Be nice. Then be nice, everybody.
Then maybe I'll make a determination. Absolutely, I'd love to come back. I think it would be, it's important as we keep going through this process and talking about continuous improvement.
Right.
This discussion should go on forever.
Agreed. Because we're never done, are we?
We're never done.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Small Town Big Talk Show. If you enjoyed today's show, we invite you to subscribe on Stitcher, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review. The more reviews we get, the easier it will be for other small town friends to find us. We encourage you to keep on living big in your small town, because the size of your life is not determined by your zip code.